Okay, everyone, we're on to step 2, which is to know your characters. So there are a lot of ways novel plotting can come about. Some people actually start with the plot and the situation. Most writers, though, start with character development. Even Stephen King talks about how he spends time thinking about his characters and then putting them in the situation. So I want to talk a little bit in this lesson about how to make sure your characters are set and ready to go for what you're going to throw at them. If people don't connect with your protagonist, they are going to put down the book no matter how great your plot twist is or no matter how amazing your love story is or whatever it is you're writing. So we have to make sure your characters are ready before you start working on the story. So a few things we want you to work on with your characters. So first of all, spend time thinking about them. I know I said that in the last video, but sometimes we underestimate how important it is to spend some time in your head and being creative and imagining. We want to just produce because we live in a society where we want to produce quality items. We live in a society that values production and being efficient, but part of the creative process is spending some time almost daydreaming. I liken it to an actor or actress stepping into the role of the person they're portraying. You almost want to spend some time seeing the world from your main character's point of view. So that means I'm spending time thinking about who they are, thinking about every aspect of their personality. There are some great tools on Pinterest for this, some character building sheets. I will try to link one in this class if I can do that. But there are some character sheets where it's literally just pages and pages of questions you answer about your character. What's their birthday? What's their favorite food? What's their motto? What inspires them? These are some great ways to force yourself to put in the work up front with your character. If you don't do that, if you don't write your book knowing your character better than your best friend, it's going to show in your writing, and there are going to be holes, and there's going to be a lack of connection with your main character. So you really need to think about those details, even if they're not going to be in your book. The way that your character is, who they are, what they love, it's going to frame everything, and their references in the book, it's going to frame how they react to situations. So that is step 1. Get to know your character. How do you develop your characters so they're believable? Again, it's all about observing. It's about real life. Base them, on characteristics you see happening around you. What are some flaws that drive you crazy and people around you? What are strengths? What are things you admire? What are some quirks that you see? Every character needs a quirk, so that's something to think about too. If you watch the show Superstore, Amy in the show Superstore is a perfect example of this. Remember how in the beginning she never wears a name tag with her correct name on it? She's constantly switching it to a different name. That's a quirk, and it's memorable. It makes her human. In The Fault in Our Stars, Augustus, he carries around the cigarette that he puts between his lips as a metaphor but never smokes. That's a quirk. So think about these little details you can add into your character to bring them to life. So that is step 1, get to know your character. Step 2 is probably the most important, I think, when you're writing a book. What's at stake? That's the question you need to ask yourself. This is the question. It changed my whole game with writing when I heard this a few years ago. What's at stake for your character? So think about what they have to lose. Now, if you're writing in horror, for example, what's at stake? Usually their life. If you're writing romance, what's at stake? Usually their heart, usually heartbreak. But think beyond that. What else could they stand to lose? If your character doesn't stand to lose something, then your book feels very pointless and very flat. If you're in the middle of writing a book and you can't figure out what's wrong with it, you know that there's just something missing, it's probably because you don't have a clear idea of what's at stake. If you don't make it clear from the very beginning of the book what's at stake, we're going to lose interest. We're going to move on to something else. So we really need to figure out this question so that we can get that first scene right, which is the project we're going to be working on with this class, is writing that first scene of your novel. So I want you to sit down and I want you to really map out your character today. I want you to list every detail. Pretend you're answering one of those silly questionnaires you get. Pretend you're answering that for your character. Answer crazy questions that you'll probably never put into your book. What's their favorite store to shop at? What do they order at their favorite restaurant? Every detail you can think of. Jot it down in a journal, get to know them, develop them into a real three-dimensional character. And then ask what's at stake. What do they stand to lose? This will also depend on things like their fears and motivations. What drives them? What are they afraid of? If you are really struggling with this element of character development, I listened to a podcast a while ago that suggested looking at Enneagram results to really develop out your characters. So the Enneagram is a personality quiz. It's a psychology tool, and it basically says there are 9 different personalities. If you start looking at some of those different personality types, it can give you some ideas to develop your character, to think about what drives people, what people are afraid of. That can help you develop a realistic character. So we want to get to know our characters. We want to figure out what's at stake. And finally, we want to pick the name, because when we start writing this book, you're going to be using the name. So I want you to sit down and think about what name you want. This is an important choice. You know, when I first started writing, I just picked names I loved, and that's okay. But sometimes your character names are room for you to develop them even more. Do they have a name that was passed down in the family? What era are you writing in? Are you making sure that your names are true to the era and what might have been common? Do you want a common name to the era, or do you want a name that's super quirky and stands out because your character is super quirky and stands out? Do you want a name that sounds kind of like a villain name? Think about those things because they can really play a role in your story as well. So I want you to sit down today and map out your character and get them in tip-top shape, ready to go, because in the next lesson, we're going to be learning the next step in writing your book. We're going to be making another important decision so that we can start writing this actual book.